When it comes to losing belly fat, most of us are taught the same rule. Try harder, train more, eat less. But if you've ever noticed your face getting leaner, your arms and legs shrinking while your waistline refuses to move, then the problem may not be your discipline. It may be your biology. Today's video, the fastest way to shrink visceral fat, drop cortisol, challenges almost everything the fitness industry has told you about fat loss. Because visceral fat does not respond to punishment. It responds to safety signals. And the hormone that decides this is not calories, it's cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. This is not a video about pushing harder or restricting more. In fact, it explains why forcing the body through extreme dieting and intense cardio often locks belly fat in place, even when the scale goes down. Visceral fat is metabolically active, hormonally sensitive, and deeply tied to your nervous system's perception of threat. If you're tired of blaming yourself, tired of doing everything right with no results, and ready to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes, stay with me until the end of this video. You'll learn why belly fat is so protective and how to release the biological brake that's keeping it there. Make sure to subscribe and watch all the way through, because the fastest transformation doesn't come from more effort, it comes from speaking the body's language correctly. Visceral fat does not respond to effort, and this is the exact reason so many people feel stuck without understanding why. When results don't show up, the natural human reaction is to do more, cut calories harder, extend cardio sessions, wake up earlier, add more caffeine to force energy higher. From a willpower perspective, this looks disciplined. From a biological perspective, it sends a completely different message. The human body does not operate on motivation or determination. It operates on environmental perception. And visceral fat, the fat surrounding your liver, intestines, and kidneys, is not passive storage. It is a hormonally active tissue designed to respond to stress signals, not calorie math. This explains a frustratingly common pattern. The scale drops, the face gets leaner, arms and legs shrink, yet the abdomen remains firm, full, and unchanged. This doesn't happen because you're not trying hard enough. It happens because your body has assessed the situation as unsafe. When calories are cut aggressively over time, the brain doesn't interpret this as dieting for aesthetics. It interprets it as starvation. When prolonged, medium-intensity cardio elevates heart rate and breathing. The body doesn't see fat loss training. It sees pursuit or migration. And when caffeine is consumed early while cortisol is naturally high, the nervous system doesn't read focus. It reads threat activation. Together, these signals create a clear internal message. The environment is dangerous. And in a dangerous environment, the body will never prioritize looking lean. It prioritizes survival. In this state, cortisol, the primary stress hormone, takes command. Cortisol is not inherently bad. It wakes you up, sharpens reactions, and helps you overcome immediate challenges. But when cortisol remains chronically elevated, especially due to self-generated lifestyle stress, it activates very specific protective mechanisms. One of those mechanisms is defending visceral fat. Biologically, visceral fat contains a much higher density of cortisol receptors than subcutaneous fat. This means when cortisol rises, belly fat is the tissue that hears the signal the loudest. When cortisol binds to these receptors, it activates enzymes designed to store energy, not release it. In simple terms, while you believe you are burning fat, your body is being chemically instructed to lock fat into the most protected area. At the same time, elevated cortisol accelerates muscle breakdown to provide fast energy. This is why many people lose weight yet look softer, weaker, and less defined while belly fat remains. This isn't personal failure. It's the logical outcome of a survival system left switched on for too long. The critical insight here is this. The body is not resisting you. It is protecting you in the only way it knows how. For most of human evolution, stress meant winter, famine, migration, or threat. In those conditions, storing energy close to vital organs was an intelligent strategy. The problem today is that we recreate this state daily through chronic stress, poor sleep, early stimulants, extreme dieting, and excessive cardio. So, if you are stuck with belly fat, the question should not be how much harder do I need to push? The better question is, What signal is my body receiving? Safety or danger? Calm or alarm? When that signal changes, visceral fat responds accordingly, without force, without punishment. And this understanding is what allows us to move forward, because once you learn how to intentionally lower cortisol, the body no longer needs to defend its energy bunker. It can finally let go of what it has been holding onto for survival. Once it becomes clear that visceral fat responds to threat signals rather than effort, the question shifts. It is no longer, am I trying hard enough? But why is belly fat so sensitive to stress in the first place? The answer lies in the unique biological design of visceral fat itself. Unlike subcutaneous fat, which acts largely as passive energy storage, visceral fat functions more like a metabolically active endocrine organ. It constantly communicates with the nervous system, the adrenal glands, and the liver through hormones. And within this communication network, cortisol plays a central role. This is because visceral fat contains a significantly higher density of cortisol receptors than fat stored under the skin. As a result, the abdominal region becomes the primary target whenever stress hormones circulate in the bloodstream. When you experience stress, whether from work pressure, poor sleep, excessive training, or prolonged calorie restriction, the adrenal glands release cortisol as a survival response. Cortisol does not randomly choose where to act. It follows receptor density, and visceral fat, with its abundance of cortisol receptors, becomes the main docking site. The more frequent the stress, the more cortisol is drawn into this area, reinforcing a powerful biological loop. But the issue goes far beyond cortisol simply attaching to fat tissue. Once cortisol binds to its receptors, it activates a key enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, LPL. This enzyme functions like a metabolic lock. It pulls triglycerides out of the bloodstream and stores them inside fat cells, effectively sealing them in. LPL allows energy to enter fat tissue but not to exit. Cortisol is the signal that turns this lock on. At the same time, cortisol sends an opposing message to muscle tissue. There, it suppresses fat-burning enzymes and promotes protein breakdown to provide rapid fuel. This is why many people lose weight yet appear weaker, softer, and less defined, while their belly fat remains unchanged. The body is making a calculated survival decision. Sacrifice muscle to protect energy near vital organs. This dual action produces a condition many experience but rarely understand: skinny fat. Externally lean, internally stressed. Visceral fat remains defended because the metabolic environment signals danger. This is not the body sabotaging progress, it is the body following a deeply ingrained priority system. From an evolutionary standpoint, this strategy made perfect sense. During famine, harsh winters, or long migrations, storing energy close to the liver and intestines increased survival odds. Cortisol was a life-saving hormone. The problem today is that we trigger this same ancient mechanism daily, even though the threats are psychological rather than physical. The real danger is not short-term cortisol spikes, but chronically elevated baseline cortisol. When the body never receives a signal that safety has returned, visceral fat never receives permission to release its stored energy. You can change diets, increase training volume, or chase new methods, but as long as stress signals persist, survival biology will dominate. This is why effective belly fat loss cannot be addressed at the surface level. It must be approached through hormonal signaling and nervous system regulation. And this is where the conversation takes a direction rarely emphasized in mainstream fitness: how to intentionally lower cortisol through precise biological interventions, rather than relying on rest alone. That transition away from force and toward signal correction is where real change begins. After understanding why visceral fat is highly sensitive to cortisol and protected by sophisticated biological mechanisms, we encounter a paradox that traps many people in frustration. The more aggressively they diet and train, the more stubborn their belly fat becomes. This seems illogical on the surface, but from the brain's perspective, it makes perfect sense. The brain does not interpret actions through aesthetic goals. It doesn't know you want a lean waist or a defined body. Its sole function is to read environmental signals and determine whether you are safe or under threat. And the two strongest signals sent during extreme weight loss efforts are energy scarcity and physical stress. When calories are severely restricted over time, especially through aggressive dieting or frequent fasting without recovery. The brain does not see a fat loss strategy. It sees resource depletion. This is the earliest warning sign of famine in evolutionary terms. At the same time, intense and prolonged training, elevated heart rate, heavy breathing, muscular strain is not interpreted as health optimization. It is read as physical danger. Together, these signals activate an ancient program, survival mode. In this state, the body's priorities shift completely. It no longer focuses on efficiency, aesthetics, or fat loss. It focuses on conserving energy where it matters most. And visceral fat stored around vital organs becomes the primary asset to defend. In survival mode, cortisol remains elevated to keep you alert and responsive. But the trade-off is severe. All fat release signals are suppressed. Insulin sensitivity drops. Peripheral fat oxidation slows. And visceral fat is placed under strict protection, treated as a strategic reserve that cannot be touched. From the outside, weight may still decrease, creating the illusion of progress. Internally, however, the body is adapting in the opposite direction. It lowers basal metabolic rate. It learns to function on fewer calories. It preserves dangerous visceral fat while breaking down muscle to maintain balance. This is why many people hit prolonged plateaus, feel exhausted, or regain fat after intense efforts. The harder the push, the higher the cortisol. The higher the cortisol, the stronger the threat signal. And when threat signals persist, visceral fat does not just remain, it becomes increasingly defended over time. At this stage, the issue is no longer discipline or motivation. It is a matter of miscommunication with the body. The body does not need proof of strength. It needs proof of safety. Only when the brain consistently perceives safety can survival mode deactivate. And only when survival mode deactivates does cortisol begin to fall, allowing visceral fat to relinquish its defensive role. Recognizing this marks a critical turning point. Fat loss is no longer a battle against the body, but a process of correcting biological signals intelligently. And that leads directly into the next phase. How to deliberately send those safety signals, not through passive rest, but through precise daily interventions that speak the body's language. Once it becomes clear that restriction and intensity only keep the nervous system locked in alarm mode, the most important question shifts from "what should I do more of?" to "what signal does my body need to feel safe again?" Because only when safety is restored can cortisol return to its biological baseline, and only then does visceral fat have permission to retreat. This is the fundamental difference between sustainable fat loss and forced fat loss. The body does not need to be convinced through pain. It needs to be reassured through correct signals. That is the foundation of the strategy presented in this video, deliberately signaling safety to the nervous system, step by step, based on physiology rather than willpower. The first phase, and the one most people unknowingly get wrong every single day, centers on a habit that seems harmless: morning caffeine. Many people wake up and immediately reach for coffee, treating it as the switch that turns their body on. But biology doesn't work that way. Naturally, the body already has a powerful wake-up mechanism known as the cortisol awakening response. Cortisol rises shortly after waking to increase alertness, blood pressure, and energy availability. This process is normal and healthy. The problem begins when caffeine is layered on top of this peak. Caffeine is not just a focus aid. To the nervous system, it is a potent stimulant. When consumed at the cortisol peak, caffeine transforms a normal wake-up signal into a biological emergency cue. The nervous system enters a state of hyperarousal, heart rate rises unnecessarily, and cortisol not only spikes higher but stays elevated longer throughout the day. This prolonged stress signal keeps abdominal fat storage pathways active for hours. The solution is not eliminating caffeine, but changing the timing. Waiting approximately 90 minutes after waking allows cortisol to peak naturally and begin declining. Adenosine, the sleep pressure molecule in the brain, also clears during this time. When caffeine is introduced later, it no longer acts as an alarm but as a gentle energy amplifier. The biological difference between these two timings is profound. At the right moment, caffeine enhances focus without triggering a strong stress response. Cortisol is not artificially extended. And most importantly, visceral fat no longer receives a danger signal. This creates a cascade effect throughout the day: more stable energy, better appetite control, and a metabolic environment that is no longer biased toward belly fat storage. Phase 1 may seem simple, but it lays the groundwork for everything that follows. When the nervous system is spoken to in the language of safety from the very start of the day, subsequent interventions can finally work as intended. From here, the process moves forward into the next phases where movement, nutrition, and breathing are used as precise biological tools to reinforce that sense of safety even further. Phase 2. Anti-cardio. Once the morning has been properly reset through caffeine timing, the next decisive step in signaling safety to the nervous system lies in how you move throughout the day. This is where many people remain stuck, believing that more intense movement automatically leads to faster fat loss. Yet again, biology tells a different story. The issue is not whether you move, but how the brain interprets that movement. Prolonged, moderate-intensity cardio, such as running for 40 to 50 minutes with elevated heart rate, heavy breathing, and sustained exertion does burn calories. But to the nervous system, this form of movement is not interpreted as exercise for health. It is interpreted as a prolonged chase. Rapid heart rate, labored breathing, rising body temperature, these are signals the brain associates with threat in evolutionary terms. And when threat is perceived, cortisol remains elevated to support survival. This becomes especially problematic for individuals who already carry high baseline stress from work, poor sleep, or psychological pressure. In that context, medium-intensity cardio does not relieve stress. It adds biological stress to an already overloaded system. Calories may be burned during the session, but the hormonal message afterward reinforces visceral fat storage. The solution is not to stop moving, but to change the language of movement. Instead of activities that tell the brain you are being chased, the body needs movement that communicates a very different message. We are moving, but we are safe. Walking in Zone 1 or Low Zone 2 is one of the few forms of movement that consistently delivers this signal. At this pace, energy is still expended, but cortisol is not aggressively stimulated. In many cases, cortisol gradually decreases during and after the walk. A daily distance of 3 to 5 kilometers is sufficient, not because of distance itself, but because of the consistency and neurological signal it provides. A key reason walking is so powerful lies in optical flow, the visual phenomenon that occurs when your eyes perceive the environment moving steadily around you. Walking outdoors, especially in natural or low-stimulus settings, sends a direct calming signal to the amygdala, the brain's fear center, indicating that movement is occurring without urgency or danger. This effect cannot be replicated by treadmills, screens, or enclosed environments. As the amygdala quiets, the entire stress axis begins to downshift. Cortisol is no longer unconsciously maintained at high levels. And in that state, visceral fat, whose role is purely defensive, no longer has a reason to remain protected. Walking, though simple, becomes one of the strongest safety signals you can offer your body each day. Phase 2 is therefore not about doing less, but about moving in a way that turns off the alarm system. And once that alarm is silenced, fat that was once locked away begins to enter a state where release becomes possible naturally, without force. Phase 3. Nutrient shield. Once movement has been adjusted so the brain no longer interprets daily activity as a threat, the next step is to reinforce safety signals from within. Because even with proper movement and routines, if the internal biochemical environment remains inflammatory and overstimulating, the nervous system can easily slip back into vigilance. This is where nutrition stops being about fuel and becomes a stress-modulating shield. Phase 3 is not about dieting or macronutrients. It focuses on specific compounds that directly blunt cortisol responses, giving the nervous system a real opportunity to downshift. In a modern environment where stress is constant, these nutrients function like biological shock absorbers, preventing the stress system from overreacting. The first compound is phosphatidylserine, a phospholipid found in neuronal cell membranes. Its role is not energy production, but stress axis regulation. Research shows that phosphatidylserine softens the cortisol response to both physical and psychological stress. Cortisol is still released when needed, but it does not spike excessively or remain elevated longer than necessary. In the evening, Phosphatidylserine is particularly effective at blunting late cortisol surges, which are a major disruptor of deep sleep. A nervous system that can fully disengage at night creates the conditions where visceral fat can finally begin to release during recovery. Next is omega-3 fatty acids, not as a generic heart-healthy supplement, but as a powerful inflammation regulator. Chronic inflammation is one of the primary reasons the body maintains elevated cortisol. In this context, cortisol acts as an internal anti-inflammatory drug. When inflammation persists due to processed foods, poor sleep, or chronic stress, the adrenal glands are forced to keep cortisol high. Omega-3 seconds address inflammation at its source, removing the need for cortisol as a control mechanism. As inflammation resolves, cortisol naturally declines, shifting the hormonal environment from defense to repair. Finally, there is magnesium, a mineral often overlooked, yet central to switching off the nervous system's stress response. Magnesium binds to GABA receptors, the brain's primary inhibitory system. When magnesium levels are sufficient, inhibitory signaling works efficiently, neural firing slows, and the body can enter a calm state. When magnesium is deficient, the nervous system behaves as if stuck in the on position. Heightened reactivity, poor sleep, prolonged tension, and persistently elevated cortisol. In that state, visceral fat remains protected because the brain never fully perceives safety. Phase 3 reveals a crucial truth. Not all problems can be solved with discipline or effort. Some biological states can only shift when the internal chemical environment is properly supported. When these nutritional shields are in place, the nervous system becomes capable of receiving safety signals from movement and lifestyle, rather than defaulting back to alarm mode. And once stress is lowered across multiple layers, the body is finally ready for the next step. Resetting the system through breath, the fastest way to tell the brain that danger has truly passed. Phase 4. Breath reset. After movement has been softened and the internal biochemical environment has been reinforced through nutritional support, one final tool remains the fastest way to send a safety signal to the brain: breath. No other method allows you to influence the nervous system as directly and rapidly as the way you inhale and exhale. We breathe over 20,000 times a day, yet most of those breaths are shallow, fast, and chest-driven patterns associated with vigilance. Each of these breaths quietly reinforces the message that danger is still present, even when no real threat exists. Repeated thousands of times, this pattern keeps cortisol elevated without any conscious trigger. Phase 4 reverses this pattern, using a simple but powerful technique: the physiological sigh. This is not a vague relaxation exercise, but a hardwired biological reflex shown to reset the nervous system's stress state in as little as 60 seconds. The technique is precise. Inhale deeply through the nose, then take a second short inhale to fully expand the alveoli. Follow this with a long, extended exhale through the mouth. That prolonged exhale strongly activates the vagus nerve, the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. As parasympathetic tone rises, heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, and most importantly, cortisol signaling is interrupted. Within 1 minute, measurable physiological changes occur. Heart rate decreases, chest tension softens, the brain receives a clear message: the emergency is over. No form of exercise or nutrition can deliver a safety signal as quickly or directly. For visceral fat, this message is critical. Visceral fat does not respond to intention or long-term plans. It responds to the current state of the nervous system. When breath signals that danger has passed, the body no longer needs to defend its energy reserves around vital organs. This is the moment the biological brake begins to release. The physiological sigh requires no equipment, no special setting, and no extraordinary discipline. It can be done before meals, in traffic, after stressful meetings, or before sleep. Each repetition reinforces the same message: you are safe. Phase 4 does not replace the previous phases, it amplifies them. When breath is used correctly, it becomes the final bridge between brain and body, allowing all previous efforts to be fully received. And with that, the process concludes with a simple but powerful truth: the body does not need to be forced to change, it needs to be reassured to let go. After everything we've explored, one truth deserves to be made clear. Visceral fat does not disappear because you punish your body long enough. It disappears when the body no longer feels the need to defend itself. The more you restrict, overtrain, and live in constant stress, the more you reinforce the false signal that the environment is unsafe and belly fat remains as a layer of biological armor. Losing visceral fat is not a test of willpower. It is a process of correcting biological signals. When cortisol returns to its natural baseline, the nervous system exits alarm mode, hormones rebalance, and the body does what it was designed to do: release excess stored energy. No extremes, no suffering, just the right signals. If you've ever believed you weren't doing enough, I hope this video helps you see that the issue was never effort, it was communication. When you speak the body's language, it stops resisting and starts cooperating. If this perspective resonated with you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos where we continue breaking down the hidden biology behind belly fat, stress, hormones, and metabolism clearly, calmly, and grounded in real science. Feel free to rewatch this video, save it to apply each step, and share it with anyone who feels stuck the way you once did. Your body doesn't need to be conquered. It needs to be understood.